Welcome to English 9 Online. I know it's a little bit weird, but I hope that we're all patient with each other as we figure this out. So, let's go through this next thing that we're going to be talking about called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. It is a short 12-chapter book that we're going to be reading for the next couple of weeks. So, let's begin. All right, so the historical context of this book is the 1960s. So during the 1960s, you can tell there was a lot of marches. There was a lot of conversation going on about rights. You can see from the signs here that, that's what's happening right now. So, some facts about the 1960s. First, we have Presidents John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Dwight Eisenhower. They were the main three presidents that happened during this time. Obviously, their rules or their presidencies extend much further than these just 10 years. But just to give you an example, these are three of the presidents during this time. The average income of a working man was $5,600. This is a fraction of what we make now. The average house value is $11,600. Right now, it's like $210,000. Huge amount of inflation. The average gas price was 30 cents a gallon of gas. For those of you guys who know or who are driving and starting to figure out gas and stuff, right now the gas is at like $1.90, which is super low just because of this whole coronavirus thing. But the average is usually like $2.30, $2.50, something like that. Famous people during this time were the Beatles, which is a band, Martin Luther King, Neil Armstrong, Muhammad Ali, who was a boxer, Richard Nixon, a future president, Mao Zedong, ruler of the Chinese dynasty, Nelson Mandela, I believe he was a ruler in South Africa, Fidel Castro was in Cuba, etc. Many more people. Clothing styles. This comes into play during this book, so that's why I'm kind of showing you how important this is. So we have these very A-line style dresses for guys or girls who don't know what that means. It's like shaped like an A. Very classy looking. Guys, bell-bottom pants tucked in with belts. Also, we have like this leather jacket, the jeans, the dark clothing, the hair slicked back. All very popular styles. Vehicles. So we have this VW Bug here. We have motorcycles as a way of transportation. We have these Ford vehicles, these cars. A lot of vehicles during this time were convertible style. Don't ask me why. I don't have an explanation for you. But they were convertible style. Very easy to get into, tended to be coupes, which means they only had 2 doors. They didn't have 4 doors like a lot of our vans and sedans have. Some current events. Now, S.E. Hinton does not talk about these current events really specifically in this book, but again, to further help us understand what's going on during this time that she's writing it and the time of the actual book, we need to look at these events. So first, we have the Civil Rights Movement, which was around 1950s to 1960s. Obviously, it extends both ways, so into the 1940s, but also into the 1970s and further on. The Civil Rights Movement specifically was about blacks gaining civil rights under the law. The Civil War had ended in the 1860s. The end of the 1860s, but there was a lot of segregation yet. There was a lot of unrest, mistreatment of African American people. And so this movement kind of helped them gain footholds into American society. One of the big debates, one of the big laws that had to happen was Brown versus the Board of Education. This stopped the practice of segregated schools. In the 1960s, there were schools that were made just for whites. They were made just for blacks. As this civil rights movement started to get incorporated into society, it started to be just water fountains at schools that were for whites and water fountains and bathrooms for blacks. But this debate, this law, stopped segregated schools altogether. So everyone intermingled together. Some important people during this time were Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. The latter two were both assassinated for their beliefs and for their stances on African American rights. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 allowed equal pay for African Americans. So this doesn't mean women African Americans, it just means African American men. Another current event was the space race and the moon landing. Early on in the 50s, it was a race between Russia and us to see who could get to the moon first. There are many conspiracies that say that Russia did get to the moon first. Also, other conspiracies that said the United States never got to the moon and it's just a hoax. But according to history, July 16, 1969, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong arrived on the moon. They put the American flag down, and we'd hear the line, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Finally, we have the Vietnam War, which was a war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. It was a war between communism and anti-communism. For those of you guys who don't know, communism is a type of government. Not a lot of people like it. The USA sided with South Vietnam. It was a bloody battle. It was full of prisoners of war, which are POWs. I know a lot of our grandparents and great-grandparents fought in it. My grandpa didn't necessarily fight in it, but he was a mechanic of the tanks during this time. There were 3 million people killed, about 58,000 Americans. So now the author, S.E. Hinton, her real name is Susan Eloise Hinton. She was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1948, so just after World War II. She began writing The Outsiders as a sophomore, 15-year-old girl. Now, those of you guys who are interested in writing, like to write, this goes to show that no matter what age you are, no matter what gender you are able to do great things. The reason, though, that she wrote it was because she wasn't satisfied with the current literature of her time. People her age and situations and the societies that people were writing about were being sugar-coated, which means they were made to look like the best they could be. Obviously, life is not all candy canes and rainbows. She published the book in 1967 under the name S.E. Hinton. She was advised to do this under a different name or not her real name, because she was a girl. People weren't going to read a book from a girl. But S.E. Hinton kind of has the ability to be a boy's name or a girl's name. She also wrote other novels, Tex, Rumblefish, That Was Then, This Is Now, but The Outsiders was her first novel. Now the actual book, The Outsiders. It is based on S.E. Hinton's high school experience in Oklahoma. It was actually considered to be the first realistic young adult novel because, like I said earlier, she didn't sugarcoat anything. Everything is straight and as realistic as possible. It demonstrates the battles between the Socs and the Greasers. These were two opposite social circles. Think about it as like the popular kids, the preppy kids, the Socs versus like the maybe partiers or the kids who aren't rich, the poor families. It's like a battle between these two. Some terminology that you're going to see throughout this book. One is fuzz, which is the police. It's so fascinating to me to see the different terminology and different language and different words that different societies use or generations use for certain things. So this is kind of why you're learning about this. A heater is a gun, a broad is a woman, and then hacked off means to be angry. So if you see these, just a few more. A JD is a juvenile delinquent, so someone who has been to juvie or jail at a young age. The cooler is jail. Pickled means that you are drunk, and a rumble is a fight.